Have you ever played a game that feels like a dream? Like the logic in the world makes no sense, and yet the game operates as if everything is normal. This indie developer sent me their game, and as I played it, the gameplay felt so strange to me that it bordered on surreal. But the more I played, the more I wondered, was this a stylistic choice or was this a side effect? So today I'll tell you about my first impressions, and then we'll compare them to what the developer actually intended. My name is Devon, this is Games Over Qualia. We're going to talk about Credit Farm by Shroombot today. So Credit Farm is a game that I think is best described as a number manipulation game. That's what I would call it, at least. I think mostly this game is trying to be a deck builder. You are a person known as a debtician, and what people do is they come over to you and they say, hey, can you overload my bank account? Which I don't know what that means, but they say that, and then they give you their credit card. You take their credit card and you start spending it wildly, like just sending them into skyrocketing debt. And the point is to get them so in debt that they quote unquote overload the bank account, which then cancels their debt somehow. And what happens is that you upgrade with other credit cards. So there's more credit cards that come in, and then you have like this suitcase basically that's full of lots of different credit cards that you're doing for like a bunch of people, basically. Each credit card has its own kind of special thing that it does. The second one adds $6 of debt onto the purchase that you make. The third one, it lets you use it twice per turn, also takes away $5 of your debt when you're spending. And I'm getting a little confused with the language, and we'll get into that. So that's what the game is about. And you basically, buy items in just like the most insane ways, and you're trying to get that big number to go up. And that's what the game is about. Just get that big number up. I felt very disconnected from this game. The reason why I felt so disconnected was because of the way that it portrays reality. I'm going to go into each of these specific things that disconnected me, but there was a lot of little things. The first little thing was the big number at the top. It goes up in dollar amounts. So you buy an item and then your number goes up. And you're like, okay, well, that's sending me into debt, but upward. So I keep thinking of debt as a negative number, and this one you have to think of it as a positive number. So just a little semantics thing. Then after that, then you use credit cards to buy specific items, but the items themselves are so strange to me. First, they're construction items, and they change a little bit as you go on through the game. But the first ones are construction items, and they're strangely cheap. You have things like worker boots, you have orange cones, you have hammers, wrenches, screwdrivers, and they're all costing between, like the most is probably $25. You pay that much for a hammer, and then the rest is something around $4 to $10 or something. So it was also very strange to say, okay, I have a credit card, I'm going to start spending it on construction supplies. It's just odd because my character is not a construction worker, nor am I working for construction workers. So very strange. So that was the second thing. The third thing that took me out was the ways in which that this money is calculated to make your big number go up. It makes sense in this kind of synergistic kind of way where you have a credit card that says, okay, every time that you buy an item with this, it's going to be double the price. Or every time you buy an item with this, it's going to be $30 more or $30 less or whatever on your second turn or whatever, all those types of modifiers that you can do. It's weird because why does any of that happen? Like, okay, so I have a credit card that says I'm going to, whenever I spend it, it doubles the amount of the other credit cards that I have. How does that make sense in reality? Now, I know I'm picking this apart, and I know that I'm just talking about semantics here, and games are not about semantics. They are much more about that. They're much more about mechanics and everything. But that's the thing that kept taking me out and disconnecting me from everything, was that the logic that the world seems to imply does not work. You can also buy items that are negative money, and that doesn't work logically to me. If I buy a boot, for example, worker boots, they'd have this effect of giving you plus $5 in debt. So if you have purchased 4 items in that single turn, then each boot that you have bought will give you $20 extra debt. But when you buy the boot up front, it costs negative dollars. Again, very strange semantically. The game kind of language and the game universe that it's setting up here doesn't make any sense to me. And even the premise, which is overloading bank accounts, also makes zero sense to me. The idea of overloading an account does kind of happen in reality where you can spend so much on a credit card that it goes into default, but that's more of a payment thing. If you're not making payments, then your debt isn't canceled at all. It's written off as a loss for that credit card company, and then they sell your debt to another collector, and then the collector tries to get you to pay them. It's just reality shifting. It's just very, very strange. So anyway, those are the things that disconnected me. That's my feeling on the game. I understand that the stuff that I'm saying about the game is mostly semantics and it's mostly aesthetics. But there's a difference in complaining about the game at a surface level and then trying to understand the game like methodically using the logic of the world that's being presented. How I want to get into this is what I want to call visual versus mechanical ontology. Ontology is the state of being something. It's a philosophical term. The mechanical promise of this game is what's aesthetically here. And what I mean by aesthetics is all this decoration that we have, right? The decoration of the credit cards themselves, the objects that we're buying, the people that are asking us to do things for them. This is all like the world that's being set up. And it's not just decoration. It's actual like mechanical explanation. It's saying, here's a credit card, use that credit card to buy some things. Those things will send me into debt, which I need to go into into debt, into a very high debt. So please do this for me. So you take the card and you start doing it, and it feels strange to do it because the cards that you're spending, again, they don't make sense in reality. And yet what we're doing is it does mirror reality. We are talking about sending people into debt. We're talking about bank accounts. We're talking about objects. The objects that we're buying are real. Nothing is surreal. And that's kind of one thing that I really wanted to go into was how disjunction kind of plays into this. So this is what I'm feeling, right? A clash between mechanics and aesthetics, right? There's some sort of weird clash going on here. And I want to talk about how that disjunction and how that clashing can be used with intent, basically. The first game that comes to mind is Post Void. Be careful, by the way, this is very flashy. This game has a lot of flashing in it. This game is a Surreal game. It is a first-person shooter, and it's a roguelike, I think, something like that, where all you have to do is just shoot your way through a maze, basically. You go through a maze, there's people in your way, you got to shoot them until you get to the end, and you're racing against a clock, and the clock is your health, basically. It's a very strange game, and I love this game quite a lot. Nothing about it mechanically makes sense in real terms. You have this gun that doesn't really look like a gun. It looks like more like a needle. You have your head, your glowing crystal head on the left that has your life force in liquid that's just kind of draining out of your hand. The people that you're shooting have big mouths for heads. The place that you're in seems to be an endless house. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then later on, you have dogs that come and attack you, but they're not dogs. They're big mouths that are stuck onto some sort of four-legged creature that's light blue. This endless-looking house area that's somehow connected to a forest. And you're trying to race out of this endless house to get into a pond, and then you restart after that. It's a very strange game aesthetically, but it makes sense surrealistically because the disjunction is part of the point. The disjunction is the intent. The mechanics here are separate from the reality than the promise of reality. So what we have here, none of the aesthetics are saying, hey, you need to be aware that this is a house and that you're walking through a house. You need to be aware that the people that you're shooting are, mouths for heads. You need to be aware that the turrets that look at you are actual creatures. They're not saying any of that. None of that is actually mattering to your gameplay. It doesn't have to do with what you're doing, which is just going from point A to point B and destroying things along your route. So in Credit Farm, this is what I mean by the disjunction being like something that feels like it's unintended. We have the promise of gameplay in here, which is credit card spending. It's directly linked. Like the world itself that we see is directly linked to our gameplay. And that's what keeps me from interacting with the systems at a meaningful level. That is basically what I wanted to talk about in my first impressions. If you don't know, so when a developer submits a game to me, I ask them some questions. So my first question was, what were you hoping that the player would feel while playing your game? This person answered, I wanted the player to feel like they were losing and that they won't manage to pull through in a level. Then manage to find a bunch of nice items that make sense to get 3 coins. Also, before starting that level, they should have fun trying to come up with a nice card synergy. The second question was, why did you choose this experience? This is a very important one. as opposed to any other experience. This person said, I chose this experience because I wanted the player to feel the fun of strategizing and planning ahead, but also the feeling of being able to buy anything you want and trying to squeeze as much profit as possible from a level. I think when he said profit, he meant debt, which is the opposite of profit. Third question was, were there any specific moments, mechanics, or ideas that you built around this emotional goal? Their answer was, first of all, there isn't a clear path to victory. This makes it much harder since you can't exactly plan how to finish a level most optimally, but it's fun to test out a build that you have already made and see what items you get. The lack of tutorial levels, quote unquote, also hints to this, since I find that teaching the player a certain mechanic while locking them down to only a couple items would ruin the fun. It seems like you're very much talking about synergies. And this is interesting because, I definitely felt that does happen in this game for sure. So specifically, I want to go to question number 2. I think question number 2 is a very important question in this specific game. So my biggest deal, like I said, my disconnect with this game is that I just don't understand why we're doing any of the things we're doing. Now, you don't necessarily need to understand why, but as I explained before, this is a conflict between mechanical ontology and visual ontology, that we're explaining a world that happens here, and in that world, this gameplay exists. However, the world doesn't make any sense. Logically, the gameplay doesn't make any sense. Question number 2 was about me asking why this experience, why this one, why would you choose this one? And I was a bit of an internet sleuth, and I went to this person's YouTube profile, and they have a devlog for this game, which is awesome. In several of their videos, they talked about wanting to create fun, and they wanted to create a specific type of fun that they were thinking of was this idea of synergy, right? Where you always have, like in deck builders, where you have a card that, has a bunch of modifiers that you create a certain outcome. And that can be really fun when you have a strategy that's really involved. And I totally feel where you're coming from when it comes to, building synergies and stuff. Positioning your deck so that you have very specific things, creating very specific synergies, right? One card will do something while another card is already doing another thing. You put them together, you get great stuff. In this game, you do the same thing, right? There was a lot of strategies that were in my mind when I was playing this game. And I did get those dopamine hits that you're talking about, but I still got disconnected from the whole thing. So what I want to ask you is why this experience, as in why did you build this world? Why credit cards? And why these objects? And why overloading accounts? And why sending people into debt? What about that experience is fun to you? Because obviously you put a lot of thought into that. I mean, there's a whole story here. It makes sense that you did this on purpose, right? This wasn't an accident. You created this number manipulation system that makes a lot of sense to you, this synergy, and I really like that. But why this experience? Why the credit cards? And that's the thing that I really want to know here. And why wasn't it something like, if you remember 2048, that was a game that was just number manipulation, right? It was a tile game, basically like those sliding logic puzzles, except it behaved differently, where you moved all the tiles at once. And all the point was just to combine them and double up the values of your single value numbers until they get to 2048, or until one of them does. That game doesn't have a world attached to it. So clearly, this idea of a credit card means something to you, as the developer Shrimbot. I think when you're creating this world that you feel something attractive about the idea of credit cards. And one of the things that you did say in your question, or in your answer, was that you liked the fantasy element. I can't remember explicitly the language that you used, but you did say that you like the idea of buying anything that you want. So in my mind, when I think about buying anything that I want with a credit card, my mind doesn't go to hammers and orange cones and beach balls and trophies. Those seem so random to me, especially with the value that there are. I'm not holding my credit card going, oh, finally I can spend $25 on a hammer, which maybe, because that is kind of absurd for a hammer, but you're not thinking, oh, finally an orange cone, $15, finally a beach ball for -$10. To me, that doesn't match. That doesn't match at all. Now, it might match for you. That might be something specifically that you're thinking of, that you're thinking, oh, that would be great. I would say that's probably not what you're thinking, because when I saw some of your older gameplay, you had lots of random objects, and they were very random. I saw like a game controller at one. There was still beach balls. You had, it very, very much seems like the objects themselves are secondary to the whole experience. So again, I would ask why, right? I would ask why this experience and not something different. Why not just number manipulations? Why not just have the whole thing like 2048, where all it is on the side are just tokens that you have that just do things, and the objects themselves are not objects, but just things that you just match. You know, why not just matching numbers? I felt a promise that was being made, and I felt like that promise was broken, is what I felt like, right? The promise was, I have credit cards, I'm going to be spending them on things, try to rack up as much debt as possible, and I felt like that was broken. What if objects were being purchased from a shopkeeper from a debt company? Yeah, that kind of stuff. And the negative cost items are really just gross stuff. Yeah, that kind of stuff is what you're saying there, I think, is exactly what I'm trying to get at with this whole idea. Yeah, what Jay is saying here of ontological clarity, right, where we have a world that actually makes sense to create. And I think you can really do this in kind of any way whatsoever. And I think that's a great way of thinking about it. I think the game needs to give you a reason to buy these things that people's brains can accept. Right now it doesn't. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I like the idea suggested on yesterday's video of using stolen credit cards. Yeah, I did just see that comment. Yeah, that's a really good idea too, where you're just trying to get, again, what we're trying to do is marry the two fields, right? The aesthetics with or the world with the mechanics, aesthetics and mechanics. They're trying to marry those together, I think, so that they create their own type of synergy, right? The idea that it feels like we're doing things for a purpose. I think that's really good. Thank you so much for watching. This video was an edited version of a previous live stream that I had. So if you want to join the next live stream, I think if you hit that bell, YouTube will notify you. Otherwise, you can go to the Discord where I announce all of my upcoming videos. Thank you to all of my members, both on Patreon and YouTube. You guys make these videos possible. Thank you so much. I will talk to you guys another time. Peace.